The billionaire saw his assistant cry in silence and finally understood how much he loved her. Before we begin, drop a comment telling us which city you're watching from, and once the story ends, don't forget to rate it from 0 to 10. Oh, and make sure to follow our channel for more stories like this. Now, sit back and enjoy every detail. She never knew he was watching, until it was too late to hide. The 45th floor of the Harrison Tech Tower stood silent at 9:47 p.m., its glass walls reflecting the scattered lights of downtown San Francisco like frozen stars. Most employees had fled hours ago, eager to embrace their Friday night freedom, leaving behind only the hum of computers and the distant whisper of the city below. Dashiell Harrison adjusted his Italian leather watch, a habit he'd developed during countless board meetings where every second counted toward millions. At 42, he commanded respect through precision, not charm. His steel-gray eyes had dissected billion-dollar deals with the same clinical detachment he applied to everything else in his meticulously controlled world. The elevator doors slid open with their familiar whisper, and Dashiell stepped into the executive corridor. He'd returned for quarterly reports that couldn't wait until Monday, because in his universe, waiting was a luxury reserved for those who settled for second place. His Italian leather shoes clicked against the marble floor as he approached his corner office, but something made him pause. A soft glow emanated from the assistant's workstation, a pool of warm light in the ocean of corporate darkness. Odd. Evangeline never stayed this late. Not once in 4 years. Evangeline Torres had been the perfect assistant, invisible when needed, indispensable always. She anticipated his needs before he voiced them, managed his impossible schedule without complaint, and maintained the kind of professional distance that kept his world running smoothly. She was efficient, reliable, and completely unreadable, which was exactly how he preferred it. Dashiell moved closer, expecting to find her organizing files or preparing Monday's presentations with her characteristic thoroughness. Instead, he discovered something that would shatter every assumption he'd built about the woman who'd become essential to his daily existence. Evangeline sat with her back to him, her usually perfect posture curved inward like a question mark. Her shoulders rose and fell in a rhythm he'd never witnessed before, subtle, controlled, but unmistakably the cadence of someone fighting a battle she was losing. She was crying. Not the dramatic sobbing of movies or the attention-seeking tears he'd witnessed in boardrooms when deals went south. This was something far more devastating, the silent, private grief of someone who'd learned that tears were a luxury she couldn't afford. Dashiell stood frozen in the doorway, his analytical mind struggling to process this new variable. In 4 years, he'd never seen Evangeline display anything beyond calm professionalism. She'd handled hostile takeovers, impossible deadlines, and his own legendary impatience with the same steady grace. But now, in the amber glow of her desk lamp, she looked impossibly small, fragile, human, her left hand pressed against her mouth, muffling any sound that might escape. Her right hand clutched a tissue that had clearly seen better moments. Between her fingers, he caught a glimpse of what appeared to be a medical bill, the kind with numbers that could devastate someone on an assistant's salary. Something twisted in Dashiell's chest, and sensation so foreign he couldn't immediately identify it. When was the last time he'd felt genuine concern for another person's pain? When had someone else's struggle ever penetrated the armor he'd spent decades perfecting? He should leave, walk away, pretend he'd never witnessed this moment of vulnerability, return Monday morning and continue their perfectly professional dance as if nothing had changed. Instead, he found himself studying the curve of her neck, the way her dark hair had escaped its usual sleek arrangement, the small tremor in her hands that spoke of exhaustion, deeper than any late night at the office could explain. For the first time in years, Dashiell Harrison, the man who'd built an empire on emotional detachment, felt something crack open inside his chest. Evangeline straightened suddenly, as if sensing his presence. She quickly dabbed her eyes and reached for her computer mouse, her movements sharp with the desperate efficiency of someone erasing evidence. Dashiell retreated into the shadows, his heart pounding with an intensity he hadn't experienced since his 20s. He slipped into his office, closed the door, and stood in the darkness, staring out at the city lights without seeing them. What had he just witnessed? And why did every instinct in his body suddenly scream that he needed to do something about it? 20 minutes later, he heard the soft chime of the elevator as Evangeline finally left for the weekend. He waited another 10 minutes before emerging from his office, but he couldn't resist walking past her workstation. Her desk was immaculate, as always. No trace of tears, no evidence of struggle, just the faint scent of her perfume, something subtle and warm that he'd never consciously noticed before tonight. But on her monitor, minimized but still visible, was a browser tab titled Second Job San Francisco. Dashiell stared at that tab for a long moment, his mind racing through calculations that had nothing to do with profit margins or market projections. When was the last time he'd wondered what someone else needed? When had another person's pain ever felt like his own responsibility? Never. And that realization terrified him more than any hostile takeover ever had. Because sometimes, the most dangerous thing you can witness is the moment someone you thought you knew reveals they're falling apart, and you realize you'd do anything to catch them. Monday morning arrived with secrets neither of them was ready to face. The Harrison Tech Tower buzzed with its usual Monday morning energy, a symphony of clicking keyboards, ringing phones, and the relentless ambition that fueled Silicon Valley's greatest success stories. But as Dashiell stepped off the executive elevator at precisely 7:30 a.m., something felt different. Everything looked the same. The marble floors gleamed under the morning sun streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows. The reception area hummed with quiet efficiency. His corner office waited with its familiar view of the Bay Bridge stretching toward Oakland. But Dashiell couldn't shake the image burned into his memory. Evangeline's shoulders trembling in the amber light, her silent tears, the medical bill clutched in her trembling fingers. "Good morning, Mr. Harrison." Her voice carried the same professional warmth it had for 4 years. But now he heard something else beneath it, a carefully constructed mask that he'd somehow never noticed before. Evangeline stood beside his office door, tablet in hand, ready to brief him on the day's schedule. Her dark hair was pulled back in its usual sleek chignon. Her navy blazer was perfectly pressed. Her smile was polite and distant, but Dashiell found himself studying the faint shadows under her green eyes, the way her left hand gripped the tablet just a fraction too tightly, the almost imperceptible tension in her shoulders. "Coffee's already on your desk," she continued, falling into step beside him. "The Peterson Industries meeting has been moved to 10:30. Their CFO had a family emergency, and the quarterly reports you requested are ready for review." Family emergency. The words hit him with unexpected force. He wondered what kind of emergency might be keeping Evangeline awake at night, searching for second jobs, crying alone in empty offices. "Thank you," he replied, his voice sounding strange to his own ears. When was the last time he'd actually looked at her during these morning briefings? Really looked? She was beautiful, not in the polished, artificial way of the socialites who frequented charity galas, but with a natural elegance that spoke of inner strength. How had he worked beside her for 4 years without truly seeing her? "Sir?" Evangeline's voice pulled him from his thoughts. "Is everything all right?" He realized he'd been staring. "Fine. Just thinking about the Peterson meeting." But as she turned to leave, he noticed something that made his chest tighten. The smallest limp in her left step, so subtle anyone else would miss it. Old sneakers beneath her professional facade, worn thin from too much walking, perhaps from a second job that required her to be on her feet for hours. The image of her searching for additional work haunted him through his first conference call. While venture capitalists discussed market projections, his mind wandered to medical bills and second jobs, and the way someone could smile professionally while drowning privately. At 10:15, during a brief break between meetings, Dashiell found himself doing something unprecedented. Instead of reviewing notes or checking stock prices, he walked to his window and watched Evangeline at her workstation. She moved with practiced efficiency, answering phones with genuine warmth, organizing files with meticulous care. But every few minutes, when she thought no one was watching, her professional mask would slip just slightly. She'd press her fingers to her temple, or take a slow, careful breath, or glance toward her computer screen with an expression that looked suspiciously like worry. "Mr. Harrison?" His secretary's voice crackled through the intercom. "The Peterson team is here. Send them to conference room A, I'll be right there." But as he gathered his files, an impulse seized him, one that defied every rule of professional conduct he'd ever followed. He grabbed his phone and typed a quick message to his assistant at the boutique coffee shop in Nob Hill, the one that served those artisanal blends he'd developed a taste for during late-night work sessions. "Send your finest morning blend to Evangeline Torres at Harrison Tech. Include a note, for a better day ahead. MH." It was a small gesture. Insignificant, really. But as he walked to his meeting, Dashiell felt something he hadn't experienced in years, the nervous anticipation of giving someone a gift, wondering if it might make them smile. The Peterson meeting dragged on for 2 hours, but Dashiell found his attention divided. While discussing merger strategies and market positioning, Part of his mind remained focused on the woman organizing his life with quiet competence just down the hall. When he finally returned to his office, he noticed Evangeline studying a small card, a slight frown creasing her brow. The coffee cup sat beside her keyboard, steam still rising from the artisanal blend. She looked up as he approached, confusion flickering in her green eyes. "Mr. Harrison? This coffee arrived with your initials, but I'm not sure why." "Company policy," he said quickly, surprising himself with the lie. "Employee Appreciation Initiative. You work hard, Evangeline. You deserve good coffee." Her frown deepened slightly, but she nodded. "That's very thoughtful. Thank you." He wanted to say more, wanted to ask about the medical bills, about the second jobs, about what had made her cry in the darkness of an empty office. Instead, he retreated to his desk and pretended to focus on quarterly reports while stealing glances at her through his open door. Evangeline sipped the coffee slowly, and for just a moment her professional mask softened into something that looked almost like contentment. It was such a small change, barely noticeable, but it sent an unexpected warmth through Dashiell's chest. As the day progressed, he found himself inventing excuses to interact with her, requesting files that weren't urgent, asking for schedule clarifications he already knew. Anything to study her face, to search for more cracks in the perfect facade she maintained. And slowly, he began to see them everywhere. The way she hesitated just slightly before eating her brown bag lunch, as if calculating whether she could afford to buy something fresher tomorrow. The careful way she handled her phone when personal texts came through, her fingers moving quickly to dismiss whatever message might be waiting. The most telling moment came at 4:30 p.m., when she thought he was in a closed-door meeting. Through the glass partition, he watched her shoulders sag with exhaustion. She closed her eyes for just a moment, pressing her palms against her temples with the practiced motion of someone managing chronic stress. When she opened her eyes and noticed him watching, the transformation was instant. Shoulders straight, smile bright, mask firmly back in place. "Is there anything you need before I finish the Henderson reports?" she asked, her voice perfectly professional. "No," he replied, but the word felt inadequate. There were 1,000 things he wanted to say, questions he wanted to ask, concerns he wanted to voice. But Dashiell Harrison had built an empire on emotional distance. How could he suddenly bridge a gap he'd spent 4 years carefully maintaining? As 6 p.m. approached, and Evangeline began organizing her desk for the evening, Dashiell made a decision that surprised even him. "Evangeline," he called out, his voice carrying a gentleness that felt foreign on his tongue. "You've been working late too often. From now on, I want you gone by 5:30 on Fridays. Company policy." She looked up, surprise flickering across her features. "Sir, I don't mind staying if..." 5:30, he repeated firmly. "No exceptions." For a moment, their eyes met across the space between his office and her desk. Something passed between them. Not quite understanding, but acknowledgement, as if she sensed that something had shifted, even if she couldn't identify what. "Thank you, Mr. Harrison," she said quietly. After she left, Dashiell remained in his office until nearly midnight, staring out at the city lights and wondering when his carefully ordered world had begun revolving around the well-being of his assistant. And somewhere in the silence of his empty office, he realized that caring about someone's pain was far more terrifying than any business deal he'd ever negotiated. Sometimes the most dangerous question isn't what you don't know. It's what happens when you finally start asking. The third artisanal coffee arrived on Wednesday morning with a different note. "Because yesterday looked difficult. M.H." Evangeline stared at the elegant handwriting, definitely not from the coffee shop, and felt something uncomfortable twist in her stomach. 3 days. 3 expensive coffees. 3 perfectly timed moments of unexpected kindness from a man who'd barely acknowledged her humanity in 4 years. She glanced toward Dashiell's office where he sat reviewing contracts with his usual laser focus. He hadn't looked up when the delivery arrived, hadn't smiled knowingly, hadn't given any indication that he was orchestrating these small gestures. If anything, he seemed more distant than usual. Professional interactions punctuated by lingering glances he probably thought she didn't notice. But Evangeline noticed everything. It was a survival skill she'd perfected long before joining Harrison Tech. Her phone buzzed with a text from her sister Catalina. "Doctor wants to schedule another round of tests. Can you cover the $400 copay? I promise I'll pay you back when..." Evangeline deleted the message before reading the rest. She couldn't handle promises that never materialized, especially not while sitting in a tower built on billions, sipping coffee that probably cost more than her lunch budget for the week. Ms. Torres? Dashiell's voice carried from his office, professional but softer than his usual corporate bark. Could you come in for a moment? She smoothed her skirt, the same navy one she'd been rotating for 3 months, and grabbed her tablet. Dashiell stood behind his desk, silhouetted against the morning skyline, looking every inch the powerful executive who'd graced the cover of Forbes twice in the past year. But something was different in his posture, less rigid, more human. I've been reviewing your performance metrics, he began, and Evangeline's stomach dropped. Performance reviews meant scrutiny. Scrutiny meant questions she couldn't afford to answer. Sir, if there's an issue with my work, there isn't. He turned to face her, and she was struck by the intensity in his steel-gray eyes. Your efficiency ratings are the highest in the company. You've never missed a deadline, never made a significant error, and you've managed my schedule through 3 major acquisitions without a single conflict. Relief flooded through her, quickly followed by confusion. Then what? I'm recommending you for a promotion. The words hung in the air between them like a challenge. Senior Executive Assistant, with a 40% salary increase and expanded benefits package. Evangeline blinked, certain she'd misheard. Sir, that's incredibly generous, but there isn't a Senior Executive Assistant position at Harrison Tech. There is now. Dashiell moved closer, and she caught the faint scent of his cologne, something expensive and understated that probably cost more than her monthly rent. The board approved it this morning. You'd report directly to me, but you'd have additional responsibilities. Corporate liaison duties, project oversight, some travel to our satellite offices. Travel. The word sent panic shooting through her chest. She couldn't travel, couldn't be away from San Francisco for extended periods. Not with Catalina's condition worsening, not with the medical bills mounting, not with everything she was barely holding together as it was. Mr. Harrison, I'm flattered, but I'm not sure I can. The position comes with a company car, he continued, as if he hadn't heard her hesitation. Full medical coverage for you and any dependents, and a signing bonus of $25,000. Medical coverage. The words hit her like a physical blow. Full coverage for dependents meant Catalina could finally get the specialist treatment she needed, could stop rationing her medications, could have hope again. But it also meant questions, background checks, references that might reveal why she'd left her last job so abruptly, why there were gaps in her employment history, why a woman with her skills had been working for assistant wages instead of climbing corporate ladders. I need to think about it, she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. Dashiell's expression shifted, revealing something that looked almost like disappointment. Of course, take all the time you need. But as she turned to leave, his voice stopped her. Evangeline? The use of her first name sent an unexpected shiver down her spine. Is everything all right? You seem stressed lately. The question was casual, but she heard something deeper beneath it. Concern, genuine, personal concern from a man who'd never asked her anything more personal than whether she preferred her coffee black or with cream. I'm fine, sir. Just tired. Are you sure? If there's anything, family issues, financial concerns, the company has resources, counseling services, emergency funds, flexible scheduling arrangements. Each offer was like a small knife twisted in her chest. He was trying to help, but help came with strings, questions, investigations into why she needed assistance, and some secrets were too dangerous to expose even to someone who seemed to genuinely care. Thank you, but I'm managing everything fine on my own. The lie tasted bitter on her tongue, but it was safer than the truth. Dashiell studied her face with an intensity that made her want to fidget. You don't have to manage everything alone, you know. That's not strength. That's just lonely. The observation was so unexpected, so accurate, that Evangeline felt tears threaten. She blinked them back quickly, professionally, but not before Dashiell noticed the moisture gathering in her eyes. I should get back to work, she said, her voice slightly hoarse. The Morrison contracts need to be reviewed before lunch. She fled his office before he could respond, before her carefully constructed walls could crumble under the weight of his unexpected kindness. At her desk, Evangeline tried to focus on contracts and schedules, but her mind kept circling back to the promotion offer, 40% salary increase, full medical benefits, a signing bonus that could solve half her problems overnight. But it would also mean closer scrutiny, more interaction with Dashiell, more opportunities for him to ask questions she couldn't answer, to notice inconsistencies in her carefully crafted professional persona. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was a voicemail from Catalina's doctor's office, their tone politely urgent in the way that meant payment was overdue and patience was running thin. She glanced toward Dashiell's office where he sat in a conference call, gesturing emphatically at something on his computer screen. Even from a distance she could see the passion in his movements, the intelligence that had built an empire from brilliant ideas and relentless determination. What would someone like him think if he knew the truth? That his perfect assistant was drowning in debt, working a weekend job at a downtown diner to make ends meet, lying on employment applications about why she'd been fired from her previous position, that she was falling apart, one unpaid bill at a time, and his small kindnesses were the only bright spots in weeks of darkness? At 5:30 p.m. sharp, his new rule, Evangeline began shutting down her computer. She was surprised when Dashiell emerged from his office, briefcase in hand. "Leaving early today?" she asked, unable to keep the surprise from her voice. In 4 years, she'd never seen him leave before 7 p.m. "Company policy," he said with the hint of a smile. "No one works late on Wednesdays anymore." Another rule that had never existed before this week. Another small gesture wrapped in corporate language to make it seem less personal than it actually was. They rode the elevator down together in silence, but Evangeline was hyper-aware of his presence beside her. The quiet confidence he radiated, the way he seemed to notice everything while appearing to focus on nothing in particular. When they reached the lobby, he hesitated. "Can I offer you a ride home? My driver could—" "I take the bus," she said quickly. "But thank you." He nodded, but something in his expression suggested he'd already known that, had probably noticed her walking to the bus stop every evening, had perhaps even seen her waiting in the rain last week when the 38 was running late. "Have a good evening, Evangeline." "You too, Mr. Harrison." But as she walked toward the bus stop, Evangeline could feel his eyes following her, and for the first time in months, she wondered what it would be like to accept help from someone who seemed to genuinely want to give it. The problem with walls was that sometimes, when someone started caring enough to look for cracks, they became impossible to maintain. The hardest person to lie to is someone who's starting to see through everything you've carefully hidden. Friday morning arrived with the kind of drizzle that made San Francisco feel like the inside of a snow globe. Gray, muted, and impossibly fragile. Evangeline stood at the bus stop, watching droplets race down the shelter's plexiglass walls while her phone buzzed insistently in her purse. She already knew what the messages would say. Catalina's latest test results, another specialist recommendation, more numbers with more zeros than Evangeline's monthly salary could accommodate. The bus wheezed to a stop and she climbed aboard, finding a seat near the back where she could disappear into the crowd of commuters. Through the rain-streaked window, she watched the city transform from residential neighborhoods to the gleaming towers of the financial district, each mile marking her transition from struggling sister to consummate professional. By the time she reached Harrison Tech, her mask was perfectly in place. "Good morning, Mr. Harrison," she said, settling at her desk with practiced efficiency. But when she looked up, she found him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite interpret. "You look tired," he said simply. It wasn't a question, and somehow that made it harder to deflect. "I'm fine. Just the rain, it always makes me sleepy." Dashiell's eyes lingered on her face for a moment longer than necessary. In the past week, she'd become acutely aware of his attention, the way his gaze seemed to catalog every detail she tried to hide. It was unnerving and oddly comforting at the same time. "I've been thinking about our conversation yesterday," he said, moving to perch on the edge of her desk, a casual intimacy that would have seemed impossible just days ago. "About the promotion." Evangeline's hands stilled on her keyboard. "I told you I needed time to think. I know what you told me." His voice carried a gentleness that made her chest tighten. "But I also know what I see. And what I see is someone who's drowning but too proud to ask for a life preserver." The observation hit too close to home, and she felt her professional composure crack slightly. "Mr. Harrison, I appreciate your concern, but—" "Dashiell? Excuse me? My name is Dashiell. We've worked together for 4 years, Evangeline. I think we're past formal titles, don't you?" The shift felt monumental, like crossing a bridge she couldn't see the end of. "Sir, I don't think—" "One question," he interrupted, his gray eyes serious. "If money weren't an issue, if you had unlimited resources, what would you do? What would your life look like?" The question blindsided her. When was the last time anyone had asked her what she wanted instead of what she could provide? I don't understand the relevance. Humor me." Evangeline stared at him. This powerful man who commanded boardrooms and billion-dollar deals, sitting on her desk like they were old friends sharing coffee. The absurdity of it made her answer more honestly than she intended. "I'd take care of my sister," she said quietly. "Get her the treatment she needs. Maybe go back to school myself. Finish the degree I started before." She stopped, realizing she'd said too much. Before what? The gentle prompt made her want to tell him everything. About Catalina's diagnosis, about leaving college to work full-time, about the previous job she'd lost when her supervisor discovered she was using company resources to research treatment options, about the crushing weight of being someone's only hope. Instead, she shook her head. Before life got complicated, Dashiell was quiet for a long moment, studying her face with an intensity that made her want to fidget. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer than she'd ever heard it. "The promotion comes with education benefits too, full tuition reimbursement for any degree program, and the medical coverage I mentioned. It's comprehensive. Specialists, experimental treatments, second opinions, everything." Each word felt like a lifeline thrown to a drowning person, but Evangeline had learned that lifelines often came with hooks. "Why are you doing this?" "Because you deserve it. Because you've earned it. Because—" He stopped himself, running a hand through his dark hair. "Because I can't stand watching you carry the world on your shoulders when I have the power to help lighten the load." The admission hung between them, heavy with implications neither seemed ready to address. Before Evangeline could respond, her phone rang with the shrill urgency of an emergency call. "Evangeline Torres? This is Dr. Brennan from UCSF Medical Center. I'm calling about your sister, Catalina Torres. She was brought in by ambulance 20 minutes ago." The world tilted sideways. The phone slipped from Evangeline's suddenly nerveless fingers, clattering to the desk as the doctor's voice continued explaining symptoms and procedures, and things she couldn't process through the roar of panic in her ears. "Evangeline." Dashiell's voice seemed to come from very far away. She felt his hand on her shoulder, steadying her as she swayed in her chair. "I have to go," she whispered, already reaching for her purse with trembling hands. "My sister, she's in the hospital. I have to. I'll drive you." "No, I can take the bus." "Like hell you will." The authority in his voice brooked no argument. "My car is in the garage. We'll be there in 15 minutes. Evangeline wanted to protest, to maintain her independence, to keep the carefully constructed barriers between her personal and professional lives intact. But as she looked into Dashiell's eyes, warm with concern and determination, she realized she was too tired, too scared, too overwhelmed to fight anymore. "Okay," she whispered. The ride to UCSF was a blur of rain-slicked streets and Dashiell's quiet, steady presence beside her. He didn't ask questions, didn't offer empty platitudes, just drove with the focused intensity he brought to everything else in his life. When they reached the hospital, he surprised her by following her inside, his hand resting lightly on the small of her back as they navigated the maze of corridors to the emergency department. "I'm here to see Catalina Torres," Evangeline told the nurse at the desk, her voice barely steady. "Are you family?" "I'm her sister, her emergency contact." The nurse's expression softened with professional sympathy. "She's stable now, but the doctor will want to speak with you about treatment options." Room 314. They found Catalina sleeping, looking impossibly young and fragile against the white hospital sheets. At 24, she still had the face of the little girl Evangeline had practically raised after their parents died in a car accident 8 years ago. "She collapsed at work," Evangeline said quietly, not really talking to Dashiell but needing to say the words out loud. "She's been getting weaker, but she won't slow down, won't admit that she needs help. She's just like you," Dashiell finished gently. Evangeline turned to look at him, really look at him, and saw something in his expression that made her breath catch. Not pity, not obligation, but something deeper, something that looked almost like, "Mr. Harrison, Dashiell, you should go back to the office. I can handle this." "I'm sure you can," he said simply. "But you don't have to, Doctor." Brennan appeared in the doorway, a kind-faced woman in her 50s who radiated the sort of calm competence that came from years of delivering difficult news. "Ms. Torres, I'm glad you're here. Your sister's condition has deteriorated more rapidly than we initially expected. We need to discuss immediate treatment options, and I'm afraid some of them are quite expensive." As the doctor outlined procedures and medications and specialist consultations, each with price tags that made Evangeline's chest tighten with familiar panic, she felt Dashiell's presence beside her like an anchor. When Dr. Brennan finished her explanation, Evangeline asked the question she'd been dreading. "How much?" for everything she needs. With insurance, you'd be looking at significant out-of-pocket costs, perhaps $40,000 to $60,000 over the next year depending on how she responds to treatment. The number hit Evangeline like a physical blow. Even with the promotion Dashiell had offered, even with the raise and benefits, it wasn't enough. It would never be enough. I understand this is overwhelming, Dr. Brennan continued gently, but we have financial counselors who can help you explore options, payment plans, charity programs. That won't be necessary, Dashiell said quietly, speaking for the first time since they'd arrived. Ms. Torres has comprehensive medical coverage through Harrison Tech. Whatever Catalina needs, we'll make sure she gets it. Evangeline stared at him in shock. Dashiell, I haven't accepted the promotion yet. Consider this a signing bonus, he said with a slight smile. Retroactive benefits. I'll have HR expedite the paperwork. Dr. Brennan looked between them with professional interest. I'll leave you to discuss the details, but I'm glad to know Catalina will get the care she needs. She's lucky to have such a devoted sister. After the doctor left, Evangeline and Dashiell sat in the uncomfortable hospital chairs, the weight of his generosity settling between them like a bridge neither had expected to cross. I can't let you do this, Evangeline said finally. You're not letting me do anything. I'm making a business decision. You're valuable to the company and ensuring your peace of mind is good for productivity. But the corporate language couldn't disguise the personal nature of what he'd just offered. They both knew this had nothing to do with business and everything to do with the way he'd been watching her, the way she'd caught him studying her face when he thought she wasn't looking, the way something fundamental had shifted between them in the space of a single week. Why? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Dashiell was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his words were careful, measured, but loaded with meaning. Because watching someone you care about suffer when you have the power to help, that's not a choice, that's just cruelty. Someone you care about. The words hung in the air between them, changing everything and nothing all at once. And in the sterile silence of a hospital room, they both realized they'd stepped across a line that neither of them knew how to step back from. When someone saves you from drowning, the hardest part isn't learning to breathe again. It's learning to trust that they won't let go. Catalina opened her eyes just as the sun was setting over the bay, painting the hospital room in shades of amber and rose gold. Evangeline had been sitting beside her bed for 3 hours, watching the steady rise and fall of her sister's chest while Dashiell worked quietly in the corner, his laptop balanced on his knees as he conducted meetings via video call in hushed tones. Evie? Catalina's voice was barely a whisper, but it was the most beautiful sound Evangeline had heard all day. I'm here, sweetheart. She leaned forward, smoothing her sister's dark hair away from her pale face. How are you feeling? Like I got hit by a truck. Catalina's eyes, the same deep brown as Evangeline's, focused with effort. What happened? I was at the restaurant and then, you collapsed. Doctor Brennan says it's related to your condition. Your blood sugar dropped dangerously low. Evangeline kept her voice steady, professional, the same tone she used to deliver bad news to corporate clients. But you're going to be okay. We're going to get you the treatment you need. Catalina's gaze drifted past her sister to where Dashiell sat, and her eyebrows rose slightly. Is that your boss? The famous billionaire you've been working for? Catalina, this is Dashiell Harrison. Dashiell, my sister Catalina. He closed his laptop and approached the bed with the same careful confidence he brought to board meetings. Present but not overwhelming. Authoritative yet respectful. It's nice to meet you, Catalina. Your sister speaks about you often. It was a lie, of course. Evangeline had never mentioned Catalina at work, had kept that part of her life carefully compartmentalized, but the kindness in his voice made the fiction feel true. She does? Catalina looked between them with the sharp intelligence that had gotten her accepted to UC Berkeley before illness derailed her plans. That's funny, because she's never mentioned you either. Well, not personally. Heat rose in Evangeline's cheeks. Cat, she talks about work sometimes. Catalina continued with the brutal honesty that came from surviving too much at too young an age. But it's always, the company this, and the schedule that. Or never Dashiell helped me, or my boss was kind today. Her eyes fixed on Dashiell with curiosity. So, what are you really doing here, Mr. Harrison? The question hung in the air like a challenge, and Evangeline felt her carefully constructed professional boundaries wavering. This was exactly what she'd been afraid of. Personal and professional lives colliding, creating complications she couldn't control. Cat, please. Mr. Harrison was kind enough to drive me here. Dashiell, he corrected gently. his eyes meeting Evangeline's. "And I'm here because your sister is important to me." The simple statement sent a jolt through Evangeline's chest. Important to him, not important to the company, not valuable as an employee, but important to him personally. Catalina's expression softened. "She is pretty amazing, isn't she? Though she'd never admit it. She's been taking care of everyone else since she was 20, never asking for help, never admitting she might need something for herself." "Catalina," Evangeline's voice carried a warning, but her sister ignored it. "Did you know she dropped out of college to take care of me? Had a full scholarship to Stanford, was going to study international business, maybe work overseas someday. But when I got sick, she came home and got a job instead." Dashiell's eyes found Evangeline's, and she saw something shift in his expression. Understanding, perhaps, or recognition. "I didn't know that." "There's a lot you don't know about my sister," Catalina said with a knowing smile. "She's very good at keeping secrets." Dr. Brennan chose that moment to return, saving Evangeline from further revelations. "How are we feeling, Ms. Torres?" "Better," Catalina said, though her voice still sounded tired. "When can I go home?" "We'd like to keep you overnight for observation. Run a few more tests in the morning. But if everything looks good, you should be able to go home tomorrow afternoon." Dr. Brennan's expression grew more serious. "However, we do need to discuss some changes to your treatment plan. Your condition is progressing more rapidly than we initially anticipated." The next 20 minutes were a blur of medical terminology and treatment options, but Evangeline barely heard the details. Her attention was fixed on the numbers, the cost of the new medications, the frequency of specialist visits, the price tag of the monitoring equipment Catalina would need at home. Even with the promotion, even with the insurance coverage Dashiell had promised, the expenses felt overwhelming. How long could she lean on his generosity before it became a burden? Before he began to resent the complications her personal life brought into his perfectly ordered world. "I'll have our financial coordinator contact you in the morning," Dr. Brennan was saying. "But don't worry about the costs. Mr. Harrison has already spoken to our billing department about ensuring comprehensive coverage." After the doctor left, the room fell into an awkward silence. Catalina looked between her sister and Dashiell with the knowing expression of someone who sensed undercurrents she couldn't quite identify. "I should let you rest," Dashiell said finally, gathering his things. "The company car will be available whenever you need transportation home, and I've arranged for a private nursing service to check on you during your recovery." "That's really not necessary," Evangeline started. "It's already arranged." His tone brooked no argument, but when he looked at her, his expression was gentle. "Can I speak with you in the hallway for a moment?" They stepped outside Catalina's room, and Dashiell closed the door behind them. The hospital corridor buzzed with quiet activity. Nurses making rounds, visitors navigating toward elevators. The constant hum of an institution that never slept. "You don't have to do all this," Evangeline said quietly. "The car, the nursing service, the medical bills, it's too much." "It's not too much, it's what's necessary." He moved closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of blue in his gray eyes. "Your sister is right, you know. You are good at keeping secrets." "I don't know what you mean." "Stanford, international business, a life you gave up to take care of someone you love." His voice was soft, almost gentle. "That's not something you put on a resume, but it tells me more about who you are than any professional reference ever could." Evangeline felt exposed, as if all her carefully constructed walls were transparent to him. "My personal life shouldn't affect my work. Your personal life is what makes you exceptional at your work." He reached out, his fingers barely brushing her arm. "The dedication, the attention to detail, the way you anticipate needs before they're expressed, that all comes from being someone who's learned to take care of people, to put their needs before your own." The touch was brief, professional, but it sent warmth spreading up her arm. "Dashiell, I know this complicates things between us," he said, his voice lower now, more intimate. "I know it crosses lines we've both been careful not to cross, but I can't pretend I don't care about what happens to you." To her, they stood in the fluorescent-lit hallway, surrounded by the clinical efficiency of a hospital, and Evangeline felt something fundamental shift between them. This wasn't about employee benefits or corporate policies anymore. This was personal, messy, complicated, everything she'd spent 4 years trying to avoid. "I should stay the night," she said, not quite meeting his eyes. "Make sure she's okay. I'll have someone bring you a change of clothes and some coffee that doesn't taste like it was filtered through cardboard." He paused, studying her face. "And Evangeline, tomorrow, when you're ready, we need to talk. Really talk." About the promotion, about what's happening between us, about what happens next. She nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Because she could feel it too. The shift, the change, the way something that had started as professional courtesy had evolved into something deeper and far more dangerous. After he left, Evangeline returned to Catalina's room to find her sister watching her with knowing eyes. "So," Catalina said with a slight smile, "want to tell me what's really going on between you and your billionaire boss?" Evangeline sank into the visitor's chair, suddenly exhausted. "It's complicated. The best things usually are." Catalina's voice was gentle, understanding. "He cares about you, Evie, really cares. I can see it in the way he looks at you. He's my boss, Cat. It's not that simple. Love never is." Catalina reached for her sister's hand, squeezing gently. "But maybe for once in your life you could let someone take care of you instead of always being the one doing the taking care of." As visiting hours ended and the hospital settled into its nighttime rhythm, Evangeline sat in the darkened room listening to her sister's steady breathing and wondering when her carefully ordered life had become so beautifully, terrifyingly complicated. Because sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is let someone see who you really are and discover they want to stay anyway. The most terrifying conversations are the ones where you finally have to tell the truth. Monday morning arrived with unusual clarity, the kind of crisp San Francisco day where the fog lifted early and the city sparkled like a promise. Evangeline stood at her bathroom mirror, applying concealer under eyes that had barely slept over the weekend. Today was the conversation, the one Dashiell had promised, the one that would either change everything or destroy the fragile balance they'd maintained. Catalina was home resting comfortably with the private nurse Dashiell had insisted on hiring. The medications were working. The treatment plan was in motion. For the first time in months, Evangeline didn't have to choose between her sister's health and financial stability. But every kindness came with a weight, and the accumulated debt of gratitude felt heavier than any bill she'd ever struggled to pay. The elevator to the 45th floor seemed slower than usual, each floor marking time until the inevitable moment when professional distance would either be restored or permanently shattered. When the doors opened, she found Dashiell waiting by her desk, 2 cups of coffee in his hands. Not the artisanal blends he'd been sending, but simple black coffee from the break room. "Good morning," he said, offering her one of the cups. His voice carried the same careful neutrality she remembered from their first months working together, before everything became complicated. "Good morning." She accepted the coffee, their fingers brushing briefly in the exchange. "How was your weekend?" "Productive. I spent some time thinking about our situation." He gestured toward his office. "Shall we?" The walk to his office felt like a march toward judgment. Evangeline had rehearsed this conversation dozens of times over the weekend, practicing professional responses to personal questions, preparing to rebuild the walls that had somehow crumbled in the space of a hospital corridor. Dashiell closed the door behind them and moved to the window, his back to her as he looked out at the bay. The morning light caught the silver threads in his dark hair, reminding her that he was a man who'd built an empire through careful calculation and strategic thinking. Whatever he'd decided over the weekend, it would be logical, measured, and probably devastating to the feelings she'd been trying so hard to suppress. "I've been thinking about boundaries," he said without turning around. "Professional boundaries. The lines we're supposed to maintain between personal and professional relationships." Evangeline's heart sank. This was it. The conversation where he would restore order to their professional relationship, where he would kindly but firmly remind her that his generosity didn't mean anything beyond corporate responsibility. "I understand, sir. I know the situation with my sister created some complications. I want you to know that I intend to pay back every cent of the medical expenses, and if you think it would be better for me to find another position..." "Evangeline," he turned to face her, and something in his expression made her words die in her throat. "Stop." She fell silent, her hands wrapped around the coffee cup for warmth that had nothing to do with temperature. "I've spent my entire career maintaining professional distance," he continued, moving closer. "It's served me well. It's allowed me to make difficult decisions without emotional interference, to build a company without the complications that come from caring too much about any individual person." Each word felt like a small knife, confirming her worst fears about where this conversation was heading. "But somewhere in the past week," he said, stopping just close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes, "I realized that philosophy has left me with a life that's professionally successful and personally empty." The admission caught her off guard. This wasn't the direction she'd expected. "I've watched you for 4 years," he continued, his voice softer now. watched you manage impossible schedules with grace, handle difficult clients with patience, and somehow make my chaotic world run smoothly. But it wasn't until I saw you crying in this office that I realized I'd never actually seen you. Evangeline's breath caught. Dashiell, let me finish. He reached out, his fingers barely grazing her wrist. When I saw you in pain, something fundamental shifted in my chest. For the first time in years, someone else's well-being became more important to me than my own comfort. Your tears kept me awake at night. Your struggles became mine to solve. And when your sister needed help, saying no wasn't even an option. The words hung between them, heavy with implication. Evangeline stared at him, afraid to breathe, afraid to hope, afraid to believe what she thought she was hearing. I know this complicates everything, he said, his thumb now tracing small circles on the inside of her wrist. I know it goes against every rule of professional conduct. I know it could change the dynamic of our working relationship in ways that might be uncomfortable for both of us. Then why? Because I'm falling in love with you. The words came out quiet but certain, like a business decision he'd analyzed from every angle before committing. Because somewhere between watching you handle my impossible demands with endless patience and seeing you sacrifice everything for someone you love, I realize that you've become the most important person in my world. The coffee cup slipped from Evangeline's nerveless fingers, hitting the floor with a soft thud that seemed extraordinarily loud in the sudden silence. She stared at him, her mind struggling to process what he'd just said. You're falling in love with me, she repeated, the words feeling foreign on her tongue. Completely, irrevocably, inconveniently. He smiled slightly, the first genuine smile she'd seen from him in days. I've analyzed it from every angle, tried to talk myself out of it, attempted to restore professional distance. But every time I see you, every time you solve a problem I didn't even know existed, every time you do something selfless and extraordinary while pretending it's just part of your job, I fall a little deeper. Evangeline felt tears gathering in her eyes, but for once they weren't from stress or exhaustion or fear. This is crazy. You're my boss. I'm your assistant. There are protocols, professional standards. There are also resignations and new job opportunities and ways to change the professional dynamic if that's what you want. His hand moved to cup her face, his thumb wiping away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. But first I need to know, is this completely one-sided? Because I've been watching you too, and sometimes I think I see something in your eyes when you look at me. The question hung between them like a bridge she could either cross or burn. For 4 years she'd been the perfect assistant, professional and distant, and completely under control. But as she looked into Dashiell's eyes, vulnerable now in a way she'd never seen from the powerful executive, she realized that control was overrated. I've been trying so hard not to feel anything for you, she whispered. You're everything I can't afford to want. Complicated, powerful, the kind of man whose life moves in circles I'll never belong to. But when you started leaving coffee on my desk, when you created policies just to protect me, when you sat in that hospital waiting room without being asked, she took a shaky breath. I started falling too. The admission felt like stepping off a cliff, exhilarating and terrifying at the same time. So what do we do now? She asked. Dashiell's answer was to kiss her. It was gentle at first, tentative, as if he was still asking permission. But when she kissed him back, her hands fisting in the fabric of his shirt, it deepened into something desperate and honest, and 4 years in the making. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, he rested his forehead against hers. Now, he said, his voice rough with emotion, we figure out how to make this work without destroying each other in the process. It's going to be complicated, she warned. The best things usually are, he replied, echoing Catalina's words from the hospital. But, Evangeline, I'd rather have complicated with you than simple with anyone else. As they stood in his office, the morning sun streaming through the windows and the city humming with life below, Evangeline realized that sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is exactly the thing that might save you. Because love, like business, requires taking calculated risks. And sometimes the biggest risk is admitting you care more about someone else's happiness than your own security. The hardest part about crossing a line isn't the moment you step over it. It's learning to live on the other side. 3 days had passed since the kiss that changed everything, and Evangeline was discovering that loving Dashiell Harrison was like trying to navigate a maze blindfolded. Every interaction carried new weight, every glance held different meaning, and the simple act of bringing him coffee had become an exercise in maintaining composure while her heart hammered against her ribs. They hadn't talked about what happened in his office. Not really. There had been stolen moments. his hand brushing hers when she handed him files, the way he lingered near her desk during conversations that could have been conducted over email, the careful dance they performed around the elephant that had taken up permanent residence in their professional space. But the real world had demands that didn't pause for personal revelations. "The Henderson Industries board meeting is at 2, Evangeline said, standing in his office doorway with her tablet, trying to project the same professional demeanor she'd maintained for 4 years. "And your 3 o'clock with the venture capital group from Tokyo has been moved to tomorrow." They had flight delays. Dashiell looked up from the contract he'd been reviewing, and something in his expression made her breath catch. There was heat there, carefully controlled but unmistakable. "Close the door." Her heart stuttered. "Sir, I don't think—" "Close the door, Evangeline." She did, turning to face him with what she hoped was professional composure. He set down his pen and moved around his desk, stopping just close enough that she could smell his cologne, that expensive, understated scent that had become as familiar as her own heartbeat. "We need to talk about this," he said quietly. "About us. About how we navigate this, without destroying what we've built." "I've been thinking about that too." She clutched her tablet like a shield. "Maybe we should establish some ground rules. Professional boundaries during business hours. No personal discussions in the office, no." He stepped closer, and her words died on her lips. "What if I don't want boundaries?" The question hung between them like a challenge. Evangeline stared at him, this powerful man who commanded boardrooms and billion-dollar deals, and saw something vulnerable in his steel-gray eyes. "Dashiell, we have to be practical. If anyone found out—" "Found out what? That I'm in love with the most competent, dedicated, extraordinary woman I've ever known?" He reached for her hands, his thumbs tracing gentle circles on her wrists. "That I've finally found someone who makes me want to be more than just a collection of quarterly reports and market projections." His words sent warmth flooding through her chest, but fear followed close behind. "Your reputation, the company's image. If this became public knowledge, it could affect stock prices, board confidence. Let me worry about the board." His voice carried that familiar authority, but gentler now. "The only opinion that matters to me is yours." Before she could respond, her phone buzzed with a text. She glanced at the screen and felt her stomach drop. "Need to talk. It's important. Meet me downstairs." Catalina was supposed to be resting at home with the nurse. The fact that she'd come to the office when traveling was still difficult for her meant something was wrong. Seriously wrong. "I have to go," Evangeline said, already moving toward the door. "My sister's here. Something's happened." "I'm coming with you." "Dashiell, no, this is exactly what I'm talking about. We can't—" But he was already grabbing his jacket, his expression brooking no argument. "When it comes to you and your family, I don't care about appearances." They found Catalina in the building's marble lobby, looking pale but determined. She wore the navy dress Evangeline had bought her for graduation, the one that cost half a paycheck, but was worth it to see her sister smile. Today, though, Catalina's expression was serious. "Cat, what are you doing here? Dr. Brennan said you should be resting." "I got a call," Catalina said, glancing between her sister and Dashiell with that sharp intelligence that made her dangerous when she was determined. "From your old boss, Anderson Mitchell." Evangeline felt the blood drain from her face. "What?" "He called the apartment this morning. Said he heard through industry connections that you were working for Harrison Tech, and that he had some concerns about your employment history that he thought your current employer should know about." The world tilted sideways. Anderson Mitchell, the man whose advances she'd rejected, who'd fired her when she'd threatened to report his behavior to HR, who'd made sure she'd never get a reference from her previous company. She'd managed to keep that part of her past buried for 4 years, had built a new professional reputation from nothing. "What did he say?" she asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to hear the answer. "Nothing specific over the phone, but he's coming here today. Said he had a meeting with Mr. Harrison at 4 o'clock to discuss your professional reliability." Catalina's eyes blazed with protective fury. "Evie, what is he talking about? What happened at your last job?" Evangeline couldn't breathe. 4 years of carefully rebuilt trust, of proving herself daily, of becoming indispensable to Dashiell's operation. All of it was about to crumble because a vindictive man couldn't let go of being rejected. "Evangeline," Dashiell's voice cut through her panic. "Look at me." She turned to face him, expecting to see suspicion or concern, or the careful distance of an executive protecting his interests. Instead, she saw something that looked like controlled rage. "Whatever this man thinks he knows about you, whatever he's planning to say, I don't care. You don't understand," she whispered. "He'll tell you I was fired for misconduct. that I'm unreliable, that I can't be trusted with confidential information. He'll make it sound like you're anything other than the most ethical, trustworthy person I've ever worked with. Dashiell moved closer, his voice deadly quiet. Let him come. Let him say whatever he wants, because anyone who knows you, really knows you, would never believe a word against your character. Catalina watched this exchange with growing understanding. Oh my God, you two are in love, Dashiell said simply, not taking his eyes off Evangeline. Which is why this conversation with your former boss is going to be very brief and very unpleasant for him. Evangeline stared at him. This man who'd just publicly claimed to love her in front of her sister, in the lobby of his own building where any employee could overhear. Dashiell, your reputation will survive the scandal of loving someone worthy of love. He reached for her hands, oblivious to the curious glances from passing employees. But his reputation might not survive what I'm going to do to him if he tries to hurt you. The protective fury in his voice sent a shiver through her. This was Dashiell Harrison, the CEO, the man who'd destroyed competitors and acquired companies with ruthless efficiency, and he was preparing to turn that considerable power against anyone who threatened her. I should resign, she said quietly, before the meeting, before he can cause problems for the company. Absolutely not. The authority in his voice was absolute. You're not running anymore, Evangeline. We're not running. Whatever game this man is playing, we'll face it together. Catalina cleared her throat delicately. So, should I be worried about my sister dating a man who just threatened to destroy someone in the lobby of a public building? Despite everything, Evangeline almost smiled. Cat, I like him, Catalina announced, studying Dashiell with approval. Anyone willing to go to war for my sister gets my vote. The meeting isn't for another hour, Dashiell said, checking his watch, which gives me time to make some calls. Catalina, would you mind staying with Evangeline? I have some research to do on Mr. Anderson Mitchell. After he left, the sisters sat in silence for a moment. Finally, Catalina spoke. So that's really him? The man you've been in love with for 4 years but were too stubborn to admit it? I haven't been in love with him for 4 years. Please. I've been watching you get home from work for 4 years. I know the difference between job stress and my boss is gorgeous and brilliant and I can't have him stress. Evangeline sank into one of the lobby's leather chairs. It doesn't matter now. After today, after whatever Anderson says, everything will be ruined. Maybe, Catalina said, settling beside her. Or maybe you'll discover what it feels like to have someone fight for you instead of always being the one doing the fighting. An hour later, they watched through the lobby's glass walls as a man in an expensive suit approached the building's entrance. Anderson Mitchell looked exactly as Evangeline remembered, polished, confident, and utterly convinced of his own importance. That's him, she whispered. He looks like the kind of man who thinks the world owes him something, Catalina observed with distaste. They didn't have to wait long to find out what kind of man Dashiell thought he was. 23 minutes after Anderson entered the building, he was escorted back through the lobby by building security, his face flushed with anger and humiliation. Dashiell appeared moments later, his expression calm, but his eyes still holding traces of that controlled fury. It's handled, he said simply. What did you say to him? Evangeline asked. The truth, that his version of events didn't align with the references I'd obtained from 3 other employees at his former company, all of whom corroborated a very different story about his management style and your departure. His smile was sharp as a blade. I also mentioned that Harrison Tech has excellent lawyers and a very proactive approach to protecting employees from harassment. Evangeline stared at him. You investigated him? I investigate everyone who poses a potential threat to people I care about. It's amazing what you can learn about someone's character when you know the right questions to ask. And in the marble lobby of Harrison Tech, with her sister grinning beside her and the man she loved looking at her like she was worth fighting for, Evangeline finally understood what it meant to not face the world alone. Sometimes the scariest step isn't the first one. It's the one where you finally stop looking back. 2 weeks had passed since Anderson Mitchell's humiliating departure from Harrison Tech, and Evangeline was discovering that being loved by Dashiell Harrison was like learning to breathe underwater, exhilarating, terrifying, and completely contrary to everything she thought she knew about survival. They had established new rhythms, coffee in his office each morning before the rest of the executive floor arrived, stolen conversations during breaks between meetings, quiet dinners at small restaurants in neighborhoods where billion-dollar CEOs weren't likely to be recognized. It felt like living in 2 worlds simultaneously, The professional sphere where they maintained careful distance, and the private one where he looked at her like she was the answer to questions he'd been afraid to ask. But today was different. Today the board of directors was meeting to discuss the quarterly reports, and Dashiell had asked her to attend as his senior executive assistant, the promotion she'd finally, officially accepted. "You don't have to be nervous," he said quietly as they rode the elevator to the boardroom on the 50th floor. "You know these numbers better than anyone." "I'm not nervous about the numbers," she replied, smoothing her new charcoal blazer, another gift he'd insisted on when she'd mentioned her limited professional wardrobe. "I'm nervous about 12 of the most powerful executives in Silicon Valley, wondering why you've suddenly promoted your assistant to a position that never existed before." The elevator doors opened with their familiar whisper, revealing the executive conference room where Harrison Tech's future was decided. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the San Francisco Bay, and the polished mahogany table reflected the morning light like still water. 11 of the 12 board members were already present, their conversations quieting as Dashiell entered with Evangeline beside him. She recognized most of them from years of coordinating their schedules: Victoria Ashford from the biotech sector, Jonathan Hartwell, who'd made his fortune in renewable energy, Margaret Chen, who commanded one of the largest investment firms on the West Coast. "Good morning, everyone," Dashiell said, taking his seat at the head of the table. "Before we begin, I'd like to officially introduce Evangeline Torres, who's been promoted to Senior Executive Assistant. She'll be presenting the operational efficiency analysis today." There were polite murmurs around the table, but Evangeline caught the subtle glances, the barely raised eyebrows, the way Victoria Ashford studied her with sharp intelligence. These people hadn't built empires by accepting information at face value. "Ms. Torres," said Jonathan Hartwell, his voice carrying the careful neutrality of someone testing waters. "I believe this is a newly created position?" "That's correct," Evangeline replied, grateful that her voice remained steady. Mr. Harrison felt that the company's growth required more specialized oversight of operational coordination. "And you feel qualified for this expanded role?" Margaret Chen's question was direct but not unkind. It was the moment Evangeline had been dreading, the subtle interrogation disguised as professional courtesy. She could deflect, could defer to Dashiell's judgment, could hide behind corporate language and careful evasion. Instead, she chose truth. "I've been managing Mr. Harrison's schedule and coordinating complex projects for 4 years," she said, meeting Margaret's gaze directly. "I've overseen 3 major acquisitions, coordinated the international expansion into European markets, and streamlined operational processes that have improved company efficiency by 37%. I may not have an MBA from Stanford, but I have something more valuable: intimate knowledge of how this company actually operates on a day-to-day basis." The room fell silent. Evangeline felt heat rising in her cheeks, wondering if she'd just destroyed everything with her candor. But when she glanced at Dashiell, she saw something that looked suspiciously like pride in his expression. 37%? Victoria Ashford leaned forward with interest. "Can you elaborate on those improvements?" For the next hour, Evangeline presented analysis she'd been conducting for months without official recognition, identifying redundancies in communication protocols, streamlining vendor negotiations, implementing scheduling systems that had saved the company both time and money. She spoke with the confidence of someone who understood the business from the ground up, who had seen every aspect of its operations. When she finished, the room was quiet for a long moment. "Impressive work," Margaret Chen said finally. "These efficiency improvements alone justify the creation of your position." "Indeed," added Jonathan Hartwell. "Though I have to ask, Dashiell, why wasn't Ms. Torres in a senior role already?" It was the question that hung over everything, the one that touched on assumptions and biases and the way talent was often overlooked when it didn't fit expected patterns. Dashiell's answer was characteristically direct. "Because I was an idiot who took excellent work for granted," he said simply. "Ms. Torres has been performing at a senior level for years. I just finally got smart enough to recognize it officially." After the board meeting ended and the executives filed out with their approvals and congratulations, Evangeline found herself alone with Dashiell in the conference room. The morning sun had shifted, casting different patterns of light across the polished table. "That was terrifying," she said, sinking into one of the leather chairs. "That was brilliant." He moved to sit beside her, close enough that she could see the genuine admiration in his eyes. "You commanded that room like you belonged there. I felt like an imposter." Imposter syndrome is just the gap between how capable you are and how capable you think you are. His hand found hers, fingers intertwining. You've been running half this company from behind the scenes for years. Now you're just doing it with official recognition. Before she could respond, her phone buzzed with a call from Catalina. Evangeline answered with concern. Her sister rarely called during work hours. Evie, I have news. Catalina's voice was breathless with excitement. Good news. Dr. Brennan called. The new treatment protocol is working better than they expected. My numbers are improving faster than the most optimistic projections. Relief flooded through Evangeline so completely that she felt dizzy. Kat, that's incredible. There's more. UC Berkeley called. They want to discuss my re-enrollment for the spring semester. Apparently my academic standing was preserved during my medical leave, and they have scholarships available for students with my situation. Evangeline felt tears gathering in her eyes. Happy tears for once. Her sister, brilliant and determined, and finally healthy enough to chase her dreams again. I'm so proud of you, she whispered. After ending the call, she looked up to find Dashiell watching her with gentle understanding. Good news? The best. She's getting better, really better, and she might be able to go back to school. The magnitude of it hit her suddenly. The freedom, the possibility, the way life was finally moving in the right direction for both of them. That's wonderful, but something in his expression suggested deeper thought. You know what this means, don't you? That she'll be okay. That I don't have to worry about her every moment of every day. It means you get to stop being solely responsible for someone else's survival, he said quietly. It means you get to figure out what Evangeline Torres wants for her own life. The observation was gentle but pointed. For so long, her identity had been defined by necessity. Catalina's caregiver, the responsible sister, the one who sacrificed personal desires for family obligations. The idea of having choices, of being able to want things for herself, felt foreign and exhilarating. I'm not sure I remember how to want things just for me, she admitted. Dashiell stood and extended his hand to her. Then maybe it's time to learn. She took his hand and let him pull her to her feet. They stood close together in the empty conference room, 45 floors above the city, surrounded by the evidence of his success and the promise of her own. I want to take you to dinner tonight, he said. Not a quiet restaurant in the Mission where we won't be seen. Somewhere elegant, somewhere public, somewhere worthy of celebrating your promotion and your sister's recovery, and the fact that I'm completely, irrevocably in love with you. The declaration sent warmth spreading through her chest. People will talk. Let them. His hand cupped her face, thumb tracing her cheekbone. I'm tired of hiding how I feel about you. I'm tired of pretending that what we have is anything less than extraordinary. Dashiell Harrison, are you asking me on our first official date? I'm asking you to let me show the world that the most intelligent, capable, beautiful woman I've ever known happens to love me back. His smile was soft, vulnerable in a way she'd never seen before. Think you can handle the scandal? Standing in that conference room with the afternoon sun painting everything golden and the man she loved looking at her like she was worth celebrating, Evangeline realized she was ready for whatever came next. I think I can manage, she said, and kissed him in the middle of his own boardroom, 45 floors above a city full of possibilities. Because sometimes the greatest risk isn't keeping secrets. It's finally having the courage to stop hiding who you really are. The most beautiful moments are the ones where you finally stop running from happiness and let it catch you. The restaurant Dashiell chose was everything Evangeline had expected and feared. Le Bernardin's sister location in San Francisco, where reservations required weeks of advance notice, and every table held conversations that could influence stock markets. As their car pulled up to the valet stand, she felt her old anxieties surface like muscle memory. Second thoughts? Dashiell asked, reading her expression with the intuition that had developed between them over weeks of stolen glances and careful conversations. Third and fourth thoughts, she admitted, smoothing her black dress, another gift he'd insisted on, this one elegant enough to belong in a world she'd never imagined accessing. What if people recognize you? What if someone takes pictures? What if this becomes a story in the business journals tomorrow? Then tomorrow I'll be known as the luckiest man in Silicon Valley, he said simply, stepping out of the car and offering her his hand. The restaurant's interior was a study in understated elegance, soft lighting, fresh orchids, the kind of quiet luxury that whispered rather than shouted its expense. The maitre d' greeted Dashiell by name, leading them to a corner table with windows overlooking the bay. Mr. Harrison, Your usual table. And might I say, it's lovely to meet you, Ms. Torres. We've heard wonderful things. Evangeline blinked in surprise. You have? Word travels quickly in certain circles, Dashiell said with a slight smile as they settled into their seats. Apparently, your performance at the board meeting yesterday has been the subject of some discussion among my colleagues. Good discussion, or who does she think she is discussion? Impressed discussion. Margaret Chen called this morning to ask if you'd be interested in consulting on a project her firm is developing. His eyes sparkled with pride. I told her she'd have to wait in line. The evening unfolded like a dream Evangeline had never dared to have. They talked about everything and nothing. Her memories of growing up in San Francisco's Mission District, his early days building the company in a garage in Palo Alto, the books they'd both loved, the places they wanted to travel. I've never been anywhere, she confessed over the main course. I mean nowhere significant. The farthest I've traveled is Los Angeles, and that was for Catalina's specialist appointment. Where would you go first? If you could go anywhere in the world. She considered the question seriously. Italy, maybe. Florence. I took an art history class in community college and fell in love with the Renaissance masters. I know it's cliché, but there's something about the idea of standing in the same room as centuries of human creativity. It's not cliché, it's beautiful. His voice was soft, thoughtful. We should go. When Catalina is fully recovered, when you're comfortable taking time away, we should go to Florence. The casual way he included their future together in his plans made her chest tighten with something between joy and terror. Dashiell, I know it's fast. I know we're still figuring out how to navigate this. But Evangeline, I can't pretend I'm not thinking about forever with you. The word hung between them like a promise and a question. Forever. With a man who commanded respect and wealth and influence, who could have chosen anyone but had somehow chosen her. Sometimes I still can't believe this is real, she whispered. Believe it. He reached across the table, his fingers intertwining with hers. Believe that you're extraordinary. Believe that you deserve everything good that comes into your life. Believe that loving you is the easiest thing I've ever done. The restaurant hummed quietly around them, other conversations creating a gentle backdrop to their intimate corner. Evangeline was vaguely aware of glances from other diners, the subtle attention that followed Dashiell wherever he went. But for the first time, she didn't feel like hiding. There's something I need to tell you, she said, her voice steadier than she'd expected. About Anderson Mitchell, about why I was really fired. Dashiell's expression grew serious. You don't have to. I do. Because if we're talking about forever, you should know everything. She took a breath, gathering courage. He didn't fire me for professional misconduct. He fired me because I refused to sleep with him. The transformation in Dashiell's face was immediate and controlled, the kind of quiet fury that was far more dangerous than any explosion. Evangeline, it started small. Comments about my appearance, suggestions that I could advance faster with the right kind of cooperation. When I made it clear I wasn't interested, he became vindictive, started undermining my work, questioning my decisions in front of clients. The words came easier now, like poison finally being drawn from a wound. The final straw was when I threatened to report him to HR. He fired me the next day, claimed I'd been using company resources for personal business, which was technically true, because I'd been researching treatment options for Catalina on my work computer. Dashiell was quiet for a long moment, his thumb tracing gentle circles on her wrist. When he spoke, his voice was deadly calm. I'm going to destroy him. You already did. The investigation you conducted, that was professional neutralization. This is personal. His gray eyes were steel and fire. No one gets to treat you like that and walk away unscathed. The protective fury in his voice sent warmth through her chest, but also concern. Dashiell, I don't need you to fight my battles. This isn't about fighting your battles. This is about ensuring that powerful men understand there are consequences for abusing their positions. His hand tightened on hers. But more than that, it's about making sure you know that you never have to face anything like that alone again. Before she could respond, their server appeared with dessert. Something elaborate with gold leaf that probably cost more than her old monthly grocery budget. But Evangeline barely noticed. She was studying Dashiell's face, seeing past the controlled exterior to the man beneath. Someone who'd heard her story and hadn't questioned her judgment, hadn't suggested she should have handled it differently, hadn't made her feel like a victim. How do you do that? She asked quietly. Do what? Make me feel like I'm worth protecting without making me feel helpless. His smile was soft, transforming his features from corporate executive to the man who'd fallen in love with her strength. Because protection isn't about making someone weak. It's about making sure they're free to be strong. They finished dinner as the sun set over the bay, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. Other diners came and went, but their corner table felt like an island removed from time and consequence. "Walk with me?" Dashiell asked as they prepared to leave. Instead of calling for the car, they walked along the Embarcadero, the city lights beginning to twinkle as evening settled over San Francisco. The bay breeze carried the scent of salt water and possibility, and Evangeline felt something shift in her chest, a letting go she hadn't realized she'd been holding on to. "I need to ask you something," Dashiell said as they paused near Pier 14, the bay bridge stretching before them like a promise. "And I need you to answer honestly." Her heart stuttered. "Okay. Are you happy? Really happy, not just grateful or relieved or getting by, but genuinely happy with where your life is going?" The question surprised her with its directness. She considered it seriously, thinking about the past weeks, waking up each morning without the crushing weight of impossible bills, watching Catalina grow stronger each day, discovering her own professional worth, and above all, learning what it felt like to be loved by someone who saw her clearly and chose her anyway. "Yes," she said, and realized it was the first time she'd been able to say that word without qualification in years. "I'm happy, scared sometimes, overwhelmed occasionally, but genuinely completely happy." "Good." He stopped walking and turned to face her, his hands framing her face with tender precision. "Because I love you, Evangeline Torres. I love your strength and your vulnerability, your brilliant mind and your generous heart. I love the way you handle impossible situations with grace and the way you put everyone else's needs before your own. I love that you've made me want to be worthy of your trust." The declaration was simple and complete, delivered with the same certainty he brought to business decisions worth millions. But this was worth more than millions. This was worth everything. "I love you too," she whispered, the words carrying the weight of 4 years of careful distance finally abandoned. "I love that you see me, really see me, not just what I can do for you. I love that you make me feel safe enough to want things for myself. I love that you're not afraid of my complications." He kissed her then, soft and sure, with the lights of San Francisco sparkling around them and the promise of tomorrow spreading before them like the bay, vast, beautiful, and full of endless possibility. When they finally broke apart, both breathless and smiling, Evangeline realized that sometimes the most profound changes happen not with dramatic gestures, but with quiet certainty. Standing on that pier, in the arms of the man who'd somehow become her future, she understood that love wasn't about perfect timing or ideal circumstances. It was about two people choosing each other, again and again, until choosing became as natural as breathing. And as the city hummed with life around them, they both knew they were exactly where they belonged, not because it was safe or logical, but because some things are worth every risk you take to find them. The most powerful transformations happen not with thunder and lightning, but with quiet certainty and the courage to embrace what you've always deserved. 6 months later, Evangeline stood in the same corner of the 45th floor, where she'd once sat crying in silent desperation, but everything had changed. The space that had once felt like a prison now hummed with purpose and possibility. Her new office, complete with windows overlooking the bay and a door that actually closed, occupied the spot where her old workstation used to be. The morning sun streamed through floor-to-ceiling glass as she reviewed the quarterly reports that would define Harrison Tech's next phase of expansion. Numbers that had once represented impossible dreams now reflected strategic realities. The European division was exceeding projections. The biotech partnership had secured funding for 3 groundbreaking projects, and employee satisfaction ratings had reached an all-time high. "Knock, knock," Catalina's voice carried from the doorway, bright with the energy that had returned along with her health. "Is this a bad time for your favorite sister to interrupt?" Evangeline looked up from her computer screen, her face lighting up at the sight of Catalina in her UC Berkeley sweatshirt, textbooks tucked under her arm and color back in her cheeks. The transformation was remarkable, not just physical, but the return of dreams to her eyes, the confidence that came from having a future worth planning for. "Never a bad time for my only sister," Evangeline replied, gesturing to the comfortable chairs she'd had installed in her office. "How was your organic chemistry exam?" "Brutal but manageable. Professor Martinez says I have real potential for medical school if I keep up the current pace." Catalina settled into the chair with the easy grace of someone whose body was no longer fighting against itself. "Can you believe it? Me? Potentially becoming a doctor? I can believe it. I've always believed it. Evangeline's voice carried the warmth of someone who'd never stopped hoping, even in the darkest moments. You were always the brilliant one in the family. You just needed the chance to show it. Their conversation was interrupted by a soft knock on the office door. Dashiell appeared in the doorway, and Evangeline felt the same flutter in her chest that had been there for months. The recognition that this man, somehow impossibly, belonged to her. "Ladies," he said with the easy smile that had replaced his corporate mask around them. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything important." "Just your girlfriend bragging about her genius sister," Catalina said with the comfortable familiarity that had developed between them. "Though I suppose I should call you her fiancé now." The engagement ring on Evangeline's left hand caught the morning light, a simple but stunning solitaire that Dashiell had chosen not for its size, but for the way it seemed to capture and reflect light, much like the woman who wore it. The proposal had happened 3 weeks ago, during a quiet evening at home with no fanfare or grand gestures, just the two of them, a home-cooked meal, and the simple question of whether she wanted to spend forever figuring out life together. "I still get a little thrill when people say that word," Dashiell admitted, moving to stand behind Evangeline's chair, his hand coming to rest gently on her shoulder. "How's school, Catalina?" "Challenging, exhausting, and absolutely perfect," she replied. "I never thought I'd be grateful for organic chemistry homework, but here we are." They talked for a few more minutes about classes and career plans and the internship opportunity Catalina was considering at UCSF, the same hospital where she'd once been a patient, now potentially the place where she'd begin her journey toward becoming a physician herself. When she left for her afternoon lab session, the office felt quieter, but no less warm. "She looks incredible," Dashiell said, settling into the chair Catalina had vacated. "It's hard to believe she's the same person who was so frail just 6 months ago." "Good medical care makes a difference," Evangeline replied, though they both knew it was more than that. It was hope, opportunity, the chance to dream beyond survival. "I got the final invoice from the treatment center yesterday, all paid in full. Money well spent." His tone was casual, but she heard the satisfaction beneath it. Dashiell had never once mentioned the tens of thousands of dollars her sister's care had cost, had never made it feel like charity or obligation. It was simply what you did for people you loved. You made sure they had what they needed to thrive. "I've been thinking about something," Evangeline said, turning in her chair to face him fully. "About us. About how this all started." "Oh?" There was curiosity in his voice, tinged with the slight concern of someone who'd learned that important conversations often began with careful preambles. "Do you remember that night, when you came back to the office for reports and found me crying?" He finished quietly. "Yes, I remember. It changed everything for me. I was so embarrassed, so angry at myself for letting you see me like that. I thought it was the end of my career, the end of everything I'd worked so hard to build." She reached for his hand, their fingers intertwining with the ease of habit. "I never imagined it would be the beginning of the best part of my life." Dashiell was quiet for a moment, studying their joined hands. "I spent 4 years watching you handle impossible situations with perfect grace, but it wasn't until I saw you vulnerable that I realized I wasn't just impressed by your competence. I was falling in love with your humanity. Sometimes I think about what would have happened if you'd just walked away that night, if you'd pretended not to see. I couldn't have walked away. Even then, before I understood what I was feeling, I couldn't have left you alone in that pain." His thumb traced gentle circles on her wrist, the same gesture that had comforted her through months of gradual healing. "Some connections are inevitable, Evangeline. We just happened to find ours in the most unexpected place." The afternoon sun shifted, casting different patterns of light across her office walls. Through the windows she could see the Harrison Tech campus spreading below, research facilities, testing labs, the innovation centers where brilliant minds worked on technologies that would shape the future. And soon, very soon, her name would be on the building directory as Chief Operations Officer, a promotion the board had approved unanimously after seeing her restructure 3 major departments with stunning efficiency. "I have something for you," Dashiell said, reaching into his jacket pocket. He withdrew a small wrapped package, simple brown paper tied with string. "It's not my birthday," she protested, but accepted the gift with the curiosity he'd come to love about her, the way she approached new experiences with equal parts caution and wonder. Inside the wrapping was a small leather journal, its cover worn soft with age. She opened it carefully and found the first page inscribed in Dashiell's precise handwriting. "For all the dreams we haven't dreamed yet. D.H." I know you've been talking about going back to school, he said, his voice gentle. About maybe finishing that international business degree. This is for planning, for mapping out what comes next, for all the possibilities you're finally free to consider. Evangeline felt tears gathering in her eyes. Happy tears, grateful tears, tears for the woman she used to be who never could have imagined such kindness. Thank you, for this, for everything, for seeing potential in me when I couldn't see it myself. I didn't create your potential, he replied. I just helped you remember it was there. As the afternoon wore on, they worked in comfortable parallel, Dashiell reviewing merger proposals while Evangeline finalized the employee satisfaction survey that had become one of her signature initiatives. The easy companionship that had developed between them was perhaps the most surprising gift of their relationship, the discovery that loving someone didn't mean losing yourself, but rather finding the best version of who you could become. At 5:30 sharp, still his rule, though now it applied to both of them, they gathered their things and prepared to leave together. As they waited for the elevator, Evangeline took one last look at the executive floor that had been her world for so long. Any regrets? Dashiell asked, following her gaze. She considered the question seriously. 6 months ago, she'd been drowning in debt and desperation, hiding her struggles behind professional competence, convinced that asking for help was a form of failure. Now she stood as an executive in her own right, engaged to a man who saw her clearly and loved her completely, with her sister healthy and pursuing dreams that had once seemed impossible. None, she said with quiet certainty. Not a single one. As the elevator doors closed and they descended toward their shared future, Evangeline reflected on the strange mathematics of love, how it multiplied everything good while somehow making the burdens lighter. She'd thought accepting help would diminish her. Instead, it had freed her to become more than she'd ever imagined possible. The car was waiting to take them home, not to her small apartment in the Mission or his penthouse in Pacific Heights, but to the house they'd chosen together in Noe Valley, with its garden where Catalina liked to study on sunny afternoons, and its kitchen where Dashiell had surprised them all by revealing a talent for making Sunday morning pancakes. What are you thinking about? He asked as the city streamed past their windows. Everything, she replied, settling against his shoulder with the comfort of someone who'd finally found where she belonged. How different everything is from what I expected. How much better. Better than what? Better than anything I ever dared to hope for. As their car navigated the familiar streets toward home, toward the life they were building together one choice at a time, Evangeline understood that the most profound transformations often began with the simplest acts of courage, allowing someone to see you cry, accepting help when it was offered, believing that you deserved love that didn't require you to earn it. And in the growing darkness of a San Francisco evening, with the city lights beginning to sparkle like promises kept, two people who had found each other in the most unexpected circumstances settled into the comfortable certainty of love that had grown strong enough to build a lifetime on. 2 years later, love isn't about finding someone to complete you. It's about finding someone who inspires you to complete yourself. The autumn sun painted Florence's Piazza della Signoria in shades of gold and amber. As Evangeline Harrison, she still felt a small thrill at her married name, stood before Michelangelo's David, finally fulfilling the dream she'd shared with Dashiell over dinner 2 years ago. The museum was quieter in the early morning hours, offering them the kind of intimate experience that money could buy, but couldn't manufacture. It's smaller than I expected, she murmured, studying the famous sculpture with the analytical eye she'd developed during her art history courses at Stanford, classes she'd finally returned to complete, earning her degree summa cum laude while simultaneously revolutionizing Harrison Tech's international operations. Most masterpieces are, Dashiell replied, his arm circling her waist with the casual intimacy of 18 months of marriage. The real power isn't in the size, it's in the precision, the intention behind every detail. They'd been in Italy for 2 weeks, combining their belated honeymoon with the opening of Harrison Tech's new European headquarters in Milan. The expansion had been Evangeline's brainchild, her thesis project somehow evolving into a multi-million-dollar venture that positioned the company as a leader in sustainable technology across 3 continents. Mrs. Harrison, their private guide approached with discreet professionalism. Your sister called. She wanted to confirm your video call for this afternoon. Something about her acceptance letters? Evangeline's face lit up with the proud smile that appeared whenever Catalina was mentioned. At 26, Her sister was finishing her pre-med requirements with the kind of academic excellence that had medical schools competing for her attention. The girl who'd once rationed medications due to cost was now choosing between Harvard, Johns Hopkins, and UCSF, each offering full scholarships for a student whose personal statement about overcoming chronic illness had moved admissions committees to tears. "Tell her we'll call from the hotel at 3, Evangeline said, "and remind her that no matter which school she chooses, we're incredibly proud of her." After the guide left, they wandered through the remaining galleries in comfortable silence, their fingers intertwined as they moved from Renaissance masters to contemporary works. Marriage had taught them both the value of quiet companionship, the way love could exist in shared silences as much as in passionate declarations. "I have something to tell you," Evangeline said as they settled on a bench overlooking the Arno River, gelato melting in small cups between them. "Something I've been waiting for the right moment to share." Dashiell turned to face her fully, his expression shifting to the focused attention she'd learned meant he was preparing to hear something important. Good something or concerning something? Life-changing something. She reached for his hand, her wedding ring, a simple platinum band that matched his, catching the afternoon light. "Dr. Martinez called yesterday while you were in meetings. The partnership offer from the Stanford Research Institute came through. They want me to lead their new division on sustainable business practices in emerging markets." The offer had been unexpected, but not entirely surprising. Her work at Harrison Tech had garnered attention in academic circles, particularly her research on how technology companies could expand globally while maintaining ethical labor practices and environmental responsibility. Stanford wanted her to turn theory into actionable programs that could be implemented worldwide. "That's incredible," Dashiell said, and she heard genuine excitement in his voice despite the implications. "It's everything you've worked toward. Everything your research has been building to. It would mean stepping back from day-to-day operations at Harrison Tech, maybe eventually leaving altogether." She studied his face for signs of concern or resistance. "It would mean our professional lives taking different directions for the first time in 6 years. And how do you feel about that?" The question was so perfectly Dashiell, not asking what she should do or what would be best for the company, but focusing on her own desires and aspirations. It was one of the things she loved most about their marriage, the way he supported her ambitions without trying to direct them. "Terrified," she admitted, "and exhilarated, and ready." "Then we'll make it work." His response was immediate, certain. "We'll figure out the logistics, the schedules, the way to balance your research career with our life together. Because Evangeline, watching you discover what you're capable of has been one of the greatest privileges of my life. I'm not about to stand in the way of you becoming even more extraordinary." She leaned forward and kissed him, soft and grateful, tasting gelato and possibility on his lips. Around them, Florence hummed with the energy of a city that had witnessed centuries of human ambition and creativity, a fitting backdrop for their own small moment of choosing love over convenience. "There's something else," she said when they broke apart, her voice carrying a different kind of nervousness. "Something bigger." Dashiell's eyebrows rose slightly. "Bigger than a career change?" "We're pregnant." The words hung in the warm Italian air between them, simple and profound. They'd been trying for 3 months, and the positive test that morning had felt both completely expected and utterly miraculous. Dashiell stared at her for a long moment, his expression cycling through surprise, joy, and something that looked remarkably like wonder. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. "We're having a baby? We're having a baby." She pressed his hand to her still flat stomach, marveling at the tiny life beginning there. "Due in late spring. Perfect timing for me to finish the semester at Stanford before maternity leave." "A baby," he repeated, as if testing the word. Then his face broke into the kind of smile she'd only seen a few times. Unguarded, purely happy, the expression of a man who'd been given everything he didn't know he wanted. Their kiss this time was deeper, more desperate, full of promises and possibilities. When they finally separated, both laughing and crying simultaneously, Evangeline realized that this was what happiness looked like. Not a single perfect moment, but a series of choices that led to a life worth living. "So," Dashiell said, his hand still resting on her stomach, "Stanford research position, international travel, and a baby. Think we can handle all that?" "I think we can handle anything," she replied with the confidence of someone who'd learned that love multiplied possibilities rather than limiting them. "Besides, our child should probably learn early that both parents are workaholics who happen to be crazy about each other. The best kind of role models." As the afternoon sun began its descent toward the Tuscan hills, they made their way back to their hotel through Florence's winding streets. The city that had once seemed impossibly distant from a struggling assistant's dreams now felt like the natural next chapter in a story that kept surprising them with its beauty. That evening, as they video-called Catalina from their hotel room overlooking the Duomo, sharing news of career changes and pregnancy announcements, Evangeline reflected on the strange trajectory that had brought them to this moment. 2 years ago, she'd been hiding tears in an empty office, convinced that accepting help would diminish her somehow. Now she understood that strength wasn't about carrying burdens alone. It was about building a life worth sharing, dreams worth pursuing, and love worth fighting for. "You know what I realized today?" she said to Dashiell as they prepared for bed, the city lights of Florence twinkling beyond their windows. "What's that?" "I spent so many years afraid that needing someone would make me weak. But loving you, being loved by you, it's made me braver than I ever thought possible. That's the thing about love," he replied, pulling her into his arms with the easy intimacy that had grown between them. "It doesn't complete you. It reveals who you were meant to be all along." As they fell asleep in each other's arms with the promise of tomorrow stretching before them like an unwritten page, Evangeline understood that the most beautiful love stories weren't about perfect people finding each other. They were about flawed, complicated, wonderfully human people choosing each other again and again, through every season of their shared life. And sometimes, if you were very lucky, that choice led not just to happiness but to becoming the person you never knew you could be. Because in the end, love isn't about finding your missing piece. It's about discovering that you were whole all along, just waiting for someone who could see it too. The end. Have you ever been afraid to accept help because you thought it would make you seem weak? What would you do if someone you worked with every day suddenly saw you at your most vulnerable moment? Your participation in our channel is very important. Please leave your opinion in the comments. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the story, please subscribe to our channel and leave a comment below, letting us know what you thought. Your feedback and support mean a lot to us. Stay tuned for more exciting stories.